towards the end zone. Underthrown, touchdown. Trey Tucker to the end zone it goes. Caught! Touchdown, Armand Benz.
Bearcat Blitz coming at you as we get into the middle of November here on the Believe Network. I'm your host of Cincinnati Bearcats on SI, Russ Heltman. He's my co-host of Cincinnati Rivals, frontofficenews.com, Neil Meyer. Action-packed weekend in Cincinnati sports. Bearcats basketball stays undefeated with a near spread covering win over the Morehead State Eagles 83-56. We won't talk about that one too much because there wasn't a whole lot to get to besides one major news item that percolated and came to the forefront throughout the week. We'll touch on Dan Skilling's latest with his injury at the end of the show, but mostly going to be talking about the West Virginia. We got to call it a debacle. It was a debacle at the hands of UC's quarterback on Saturday. Brendan Sorsby, I don't know how much else I can say. It just basically gave the game away with 3 turnovers, largely all his fault. And for a team in Cincinnati that by far played well enough to win this game, they are definitely kicking themselves as they enter a 2-week road stretch where they will be underdogs in each of the next 2 games, and they're significant underdogs on the road at Iowa State this week. We'll get to all that. First, though, I got to tell you about BetOnline. It's the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen, with the largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA, and college basketball, NHL to UFC and MMA. Head to BetOnline today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline, the game starts here. Neil, will start on the offensive side of the ball for Cincinnati because that's largely where this game was lost. It was the worst game in Brendan Sorsby's Cincinnati career. The eye test showed that. The turnovers showed that. And the PFF grading showed it, as he was at the bottom among all UC offensive players with a 41.6 overall grade. All around, Neil, it was really just got to be super frustrating for the Bearcats and Brendan Sorsby, especially knowing that they were that close to a win, 31-24 loss, 3 turnovers at the hands of Brendan Sorsby, and Neil, 2 of those are instantly turned into touchdowns on returns into the end zone. Scott Satterfield kind of put it bluntly and as succinctly as you can say it. The Bearcats haven't been lucky enough to get 1 defensive touchdown in his entire tenure dating back to last season, and they unfortunately faced 2 opposing touchdowns from the defense on the other side of the ball on Saturday. That was the difference in the game, and the lack of accuracy and the just kind of boneheaded decisions in live action from Brendan Sorsby did the Bearcats in.
Yeah, no, most certainly wasn't their day on the offensive side of the ball. Obviously, you talk about the turnovers from Brendan Sorsby, but Russ, you look down the 4th and 1 call there. Obviously, in that situation, you would like to the pressure was there. You would like to see him maybe throw it away or take the sack, but if you can't get it, at least in that situation, those would have been the 2 options you do. He forced one to what looked to be Evan Pryor, and then next thing you know, it was 80 yards back the other way. And in a possession where you're looking like you could go up 14, it could have been the dagger on the game early, or it could have put them in great position. But unfortunately, it turned into 17 straight for West Virginia. And when that kind of momentum happens, it kind of felt like a repeat of last year at one point. But the turnovers for Cincinnati really hurt the offense. Obviously, 17 of those points for West Virginia came off turnovers, the 2 interceptions and then the fumble. But Russ, you look down at the stats from Saturday's performance. Cincinnati outgained West Virginia by nearly 200 yards, 436 to 248. And Russ, I don't know if it was maybe just me or JT seeing it from where we were sitting, but was the middle of the field wide open for you? I was kind of surprised that they weren't taking that under there a little bit more, the under crosser routes, because it seemed like the middle of the field was wide open for the majority of the game there for West Virginia. But overall, I mean, the turnovers is what really kind of hurt Cincinnati here in this one. I mean, you look down, West Virginia goes 3 for 11 on 3rd downs. Cincinnati's defense held them in this game, but offense came alive a little too late in this one. Obviously, you get the big interception. Brendan Sorsby connects with Evan Pryor for the big explosive play. And when we're talking about the offense, Russ, we have to give a shout out to Evan Pryor because he's been a huge part of this offense. I mean, that's his fourth
Was the
touchdown.
best offensive player easily on Saturday. I mean, he's electric, Neil. Every time he touches the football, it's bound to go for at least a first down, if not all the way to the house.
Yeah, so fourth 50-plus yard touchdown of the season. And Russ, when we're talking about Evan Pryor, let's just talk about the bar he dropped in the post-game press conference.
Yes.
I don't count the touches. I make the touches count, is what Evan Pryor said. And, I mean, he's shown that. I mean, anytime the ball's in his hands, you've heard the confidence from everybody, including the coaching staff, that they know that there's a great chance when the ball's in Evan Pryor's hands, it could be a house call. So, overall, the offense showed flashes on Saturday, but unfortunately, the turnovers is what kind of killed Cincinnati's hopes in this game. And now, on top of it, they're going to have to try to build some momentum into a daunting 3-game stretch over the final season, coming off of what was arguably their worst offensive performance of the season.
Just ran for only 3.7 yards per carry. Sack adjusted rush yards, much better. 4.7 yards per carry as a unit. Brendan Sorsby obviously under pressure a little bit more than you'd like to see in this one when you think about West Virginia tallying 3 sacks on the day. They had 3 quarterback hits to go with it, and those 2 forced fumbles. And obviously the rough forced fumble, I wouldn't say it was necessarily a boneheaded mistake by Sorsby to fumble that first fumble. It's just a rough timing. Ball kind of slips out from his tightness on his body, and the West Virginia defender makes a great play. And then the second fumble, I mean, it's
gotta get that ball out of bounds. Yeah.
It was, and he was trying to throw it away, but he got hit right as he threw it. So it went backwards, ended up being a backwards pass. They pick it up in the confusion, run it into the end zone in the final 5 minutes. And that is the capper, going up 31-21 at that point. Cincinnati only able to manage a field goal to kind of try to give themselves a chance on an onside kick with the final possession of the game. But it's really frustrating, Neil. They weren't really undisciplined in this game. You only had 5 penalties. It was just mostly the lack of ball security from Brendan Sorsby. And that kind of takes us to the concluding part of this discussion, Neil. I got to adjust my PFF grade. They actually went back and gave Sorsby a lower grade on readjustment over the last 24 hours. So he actually ended up with a 40.4 overall PFF grade after having a 46.4 PFF grade against Colorado. Decent to solid against Arizona State, 73.9, but 63.4 against UCF. Neil, he's now been sub 65 overall PFF grading wise in 3 of the last 4 games, compared to none of those types of performances in his first 5 outings at Cincinnati. Do you think it's a factor of Big 12 defensive coordinators figuring out Brendan Sorsby and making things a little bit, adding to the difficulty, not only on the plate of Sorsby, but on the plate of Brad Glenn and Scott Satterfield, to unlock some of these passing patterns down the field? Because it's not just been Sorsby missing passes. The receivers have not largely been very open for him to hit them in stride and hit them easily over the past couple of weeks, especially on the outside. Neil, the stats, the performances, the grading all show that Brendan Sorsby is getting figured out by the Big 12. And the question is, can he and the offensive brain trust at Cincinnati figure out a counterpunch against 2 of the toughest opponents, if not the toughest conference opponents they will face this season, coming up on the road at Iowa State and on the road at Kansas State?
Yeah, no, most certainly, Russ. That's a great question. But obviously, I think teams are starting to figure out that Cincinnati is going to want to pass the ball first, and that will allow Corey Kiner to get going. But for Cincinnati, the key for the success down the final 3 games is try and reverse that maybe. Try to get Corey Kiner those early touches there to where it will open things up, make the defense adjust to you, play at that kind of strength, because Joe Royer was only held to 4 targets on Saturday versus West Virginia. Now, however, he did catch all 4 targets for 30-something yards. But overall, they got to find ways to open up that run game, because you look down at the stats from Saturday, Russ, Corey Kiner had a career-high 25 carries for 91 yards, which you like to see the amount of carries, but 91 yards, just 3.6 yards per carry. For a guy like Corey Kiner, we're expecting to see that number. Well, we have been expecting to see that number from about 4 to 5, because that's what he's been able to do for the majority of his career. But overall, I think Cincinnati heading into Iowa State, it's going to be an interesting 3-3-5 defense again. It's going to be interesting to see how Brendan Sorsby goes against that defense that the Bearcats run. So it's going to be interesting. But overall, I think this is a matchup where we saw it firsthand last year. Get the run going early versus Iowa State, and it might allow things to open up and scheme up differently.
running is going to be maybe the only thing Cincinnati is able to do on Saturday. They better be able to run the football because this is one of the best pass defenses in the country going up against the quarterback that is struggling. And Neil, what did we say about the opponent this past weekend in West Virginia? We highlighted how horrific the defense passing coverage wise was entering the game. Worst pass coverage grading wise by any unit in the country entering the game on Saturday. And it looks like the interim defensive coordinator for West Virginia pushed the right buttons, was able to figure that out, solve for that a little bit, at least for 1 week. There's no solve needed in Iowa State, Neil. 11th best defense in the country by EPA per dropback and overall offensive success rate. They are 68th nationally, allowing a successful dropback 39.2% of the time. So a very, very difficult matchup for the Bearcats passing attack after having arguably their easiest matchup of the entire season this past weekend, a matchup that Brendan Sorsby didn't take full advantage of. 80 yards of his 279 came on the yak by Evan Pryor. Other than that, to me, just was not accurate enough against the defense that you have to be able to pick apart if you want to end up meeting your goals, which is making a bowl game, and they have to figure out a way to pick apart a defense at least once over the next 3 weeks. Going to be difficult. We'll see what they can do. It'll be a lot easier if their defense keeps playing, the UC defense keeps playing like they did on Saturday. We'll recap that after these messages on Bearcat Blitz. Neil, a mixture of frustration and appreciation, I think, from Bearcats fans after Saturday's loss. When you look at frustration on the offensive side, wasting one of the best performances of the season defensively for Cincinnati. No team in the FBS, among all FBS matchups this past weekend, had a higher success rate and lost than Cincinnati. No team had a bigger difference between them and their opponent and success rate per play and lost than Cincinnati. That's from Parker Fleming of Stats of War on Twitter. You can check out that graphic there. And the biggest reason for that, Neil, was this defense. They were fantastic, allowed just 248 total yards, as you mentioned. They gave up just 9 first downs, held West Virginia to 3 of 11 on third down, stifled them on their 1 fourth down opportunity, just 5.8 yards per play. They gave up 17 total points. 17 total points. 17 total points if you take away the 2 turnovers that were returned for touchdowns by the West Virginia side. Neil, they did exactly what you wanted to see. We got the Jared Bartlett revenge game in this one to full force, with Jared Bartlett playing very, very well. He was one of the best defenders for Cincinnati on Saturday. Logan Wilson paced the team with a 91.6 overall defensive grade after he got his interception in the end zone to stifle one of the drives. And then Jared Bartlett, 89.5 overall. He was all over the field, just bringing the pain. 7 total tackles, 1 sack, 1 tackle for loss, led the team in total tackles, along with Jake Golday, who was number 4, in overall PFF grading at a 70.9. Dante Corleone back to his normal ways at 74.6, third best grade, and Simeon Coleman, the freshman, at 70.2. Neil, the front 7, the interior of that defense, the heart and soul, the spine of that defense, played very, very well on Saturday and could be a reason for definite hope that Cincinnati can find one more win over these next 3 weeks and go bowling in 2024.
Yeah, no, Russ, most certainly. And I think the biggest thing from the defensive side of things on Saturday was Dante Corleone was held without a tackle in the first half, and then he came back and he finished with 3 tackles, half a sack, half a tackle for loss. So overall, a great showing from Dante Corleone in the second half. But, man, let's talk about Jared Bartlett. We talked to him about being an impact player here for Cincinnati on Saturday, and you look down, you see him with 7 tackles, a sack, a tackle for a loss. And then Jake Golday, 7 tackles, a sack, and a tackle for loss as well, and a forced fumble. So, overall, those 2 guys, that linebacker room for Cincinnati was fantastic, I thought. But, Russ, when we're talking about the linebacker room, too, it was a lot of freshmen there in the linebacker room. Simeon Coleman alongside Monte Wheaton was something we saw pretty frequently. But overall, Cincinnati's linebacker room, Jared Bartlett, that was the revenge game that we all anticipated he was going to have. But it was a great sight to see. Now for Cincinnati, can they build off that success heading into Iowa State? But overall, the Logan Wilson interception, Russ, we got to give a lot of credit there. I thought that was a great interception that really sparked the momentum for the defense and allowed that comeback. But you look down at the stats, Russ, Cincinnati should have won this game single-handedly because that was their best defensive performance of the season. 7 tackles for loss, Russ, which is a season high for Cincinnati, if I believe right. So you look down, you see 7 tackles of loss, 2 sacks, a forced fumble. Cincinnati continues to find ways and get stops, but overall, they did what they were supposed to on the defensive side of the ball, and you hate to see a good defensive performance like that get put away due to some offensive blunders.
And the boiled down stat, Neil, Brendan Sorsby's turnovers ended up breaking through it because what did we say last week? When this team misses 15 or what was it, 12 or fewer? It was something in the double digits. It was like 12 or 15 or less tackles. They're undefeated this year. And when they go above that mark, they have lost every one of those games. Well, they are no longer undefeated when they hold teams to fewer than 12 or less tackles. 6 missed tackles allowed on Saturday, but all in all, not enough offensive firepower from their own side of things to get the job done. Still, just a great overall defensive showing from this unit. I thought, I don't think you could really key in on any major issues individual performance-wise from this one, and that kind of graded out and bared out in the PFF grading as I believe, there was, of every defender that played at least 10 snaps, all earned a 54 or higher grade. Now, you want to be out of the 50s for sure, but anything 60 or above means you're not making detrimental plays out there. And that's what we saw from this Bearcats defensive unit. Quick break here. We'll touch on Dan Skilling's injury, Day Thomas's potential return this week, and an addition to the 2025 recruiting class for Cincinnati football right here on Bearcat Blitz. Touch on a lot of the kind of final 3 weeks scenarios for the Cincinnati Bearcats football team on the Thursday show. 3 games left, 2 on the road, 1 at home against TCU. Got Iowa State up next, then at Kansas State. 1 win needed. Just 1 win needed to go bowling and etch that next milestone in the Scott Satterfield era. A milestone Cincinnati Bearcats fans are hoping to see this Friday is Day Thomas's season debut against Nicholls State. We'll start with the good news, Neil, and then get to Dan Skilling's and the bad news. Maybe pending bad news. We're kind of still in the dark a little bit on his injury. But Day Thomas, the foot, Neil, you and I saw him at practice last week, getting a heavy sweat in, getting a hard workout in, and he was doing the same thing on Friday, even going up to Wes Miller. He revealing to us after the game that Day wanted to play, told him he was able to play. He was ready to play, and Wes Miller looked at him and said, "That's great. You're not playing tonight, though." Extra caution, being uber cautious with Day Thomas. It sounds as though, Neil, with a normal slate of practices this week, a normal ramp up in that sense, he will be out there against Nicholls State, and Cincinnati will have a full backcourt and able to give guys like Connor Hickman, Jizzle James a little bit more of a breather in this early non-conference slate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's one positive side, Russ, is that Day Thomas set to potentially return on Friday night versus Nicholls. And with that happening, we saw him get the workout in last Thursday heading into Morehead State. Wes Miller stated post-game that he got a great sweat in after shoot-around and he felt comfortable that he was able to play, which is a great sign. But obviously the biggest importance is being cautious with Day Thomas, especially knowing the injury that he suffered last year and the Big 12 conference schedule. Obviously, these first 3 games, you didn't really want to rush him back out there because they were 3 games you knew you would probably be able to win heavily. But with the return of Day Thomas, Russ, it will allow Connor Hickman to play the actual 2 more, which we saw him take some reins at the point guard the last 2 games. But overall, it will kind of allow Connor Hickman to play more off the ball at the 2 position, which is his natural position. But overall, it's a great positive update for Day Thomas, and hopefully we'll see him back out there Friday night. I know we'll probably have some basketball media availability this week, so we'll have a better update later in the week. But Wes Miller seemed pretty confident that Day Thomas would be able to suit up on Friday night.
Waiting to see. We're recording this right around the time where the AP poll usually drops, so potentially could see the Bearcats. I would say, Neil, they're going to move up maybe 1 or 2 spots. They're not going to move down at all in the AP poll after starting 2-0 with multiple 25-plus point victories. But just how much will they move up is the real question after a few top 25 teams lost in the opening week. UC will need Dan Skillings to be a top 15 team and definitely to be a top 10 top 10 team all season. Easy for me to say right there. And kind of a little bit in the dark. We don't quite know yet, Neil, according to Wes Miller. Quote, he came in Tuesday for film, but his knee swelled up a little bit, so we were trying to figure that out. We don't have a big update at this time. He's walking around. You guys probably saw him on the bench. We'll let you guys know when we know something. We certainly are not the same team without him and Day-Day. It would be great to get those guys back, and that's the plan right now. So we will likely get an update, Neil, I would imagine, on a potential Wednesday media availability, if we do get that this week, on what's going on with Dan Skillings' knee. Had some swelling pop up after the win against Arkansas Pine Bluff last week. Not what you want to see, but also taking some kind of context clues out of it. Watching him on the bench, I made sure to do that just to see how he was moving throughout the game on Friday night. Didn't see a noticeable limp, didn't see like crutches or a noticeable brace or anything like that. So maybe it's minor, knock on wood. Hopefully it is minor. It does not right now seem like a major issue, but you never know with these knee injuries, these knee swellings. The swelling could be hiding something much worse underneath and they weren't able to see it yet. So knock on wood, as of right now, it does not seem like a major injury for Dan Skillings, just with the way he's walking and the way that they're talking about it, but likely not going to get a firm confirmation until later on this week.
Yeah, no, most certainly. That's the biggest loss for Cincinnati. Obviously, Dan Skillings was able to affect the game in multiple different ways. You saw what he was able to do Monday night in the home opener. So 17-11 in game one of the season. But overall, Dan Skillings affects the game in a lot of different ways. We saw it on the offensive end. Cincinnati struggled on the offensive boards versus Morehead State. Without Dan Skillings, they only had one offensive rebound in the first 32 minutes. So it was a pretty big, heavily absence for Cincinnati. But overall, Wes Miller didn't have a full update on Dan Skillings yet, but just said that he came in the film on Tuesday. He didn't report any pain following the game. Came in Tuesday for film with some swelling. He did not practice last Thursday heading into the Morehead State game, which is worth noting. That's when we got the initial kind of update of the situation going on. He didn't play Friday, but overall, I mean, there's no crutches. We didn't see a big brace or anything. He seemed to be walking without a noticeable limp or anything. So obviously It could be precautionary. You never know until that full procedure or x-ray is done, that precautionary measure, whatever it might be. But overall, it kind of sounds like Wes Miller and them are still trying to figure some things out surrounding the injury heading into Nichols. Obviously, they had that week off. I'm sure we'll have a better update for people on Wednesday to kind of give a better clarification on what this injury might be and what it could mean for Cincinnati down the stretch of non-conference play.
Some interesting games coming up, and likely, Neil, if it is a decent kind of weeks-long injury, you just hope he can get back for the crosstown shootout. That is the big one on the board right now. You probably give them a little bit less of a chance, especially on these road contests against power conference teams at Georgia Tech and at Villanova. Although Georgia Tech just got beat by North Florida in the first week of the season, and Villanova got beat by who they lose to? Columbia. They lost the 5 games to Columbia last week. So it's early though. Who knows what those teams are going to look like in a couple of weeks. What Cincinnati wants to look like though is have as much of that touted depth as they possibly can, and of course, in pure Cincinnati sports fashion, right when you start boosting something up, right when you start building it up, it slowly starts to get crumbled away. And hopefully for the hopes of Bearcats fans, that does not happen with the injury bug hitting this team. Likely getting rid of one of those stings this week in terms of Day-Day Thomas coming back, pending a sting in Dan Skillings Jr. We'll see what that ends up being in the ensuing news cycle over the next coming days. Commitment, Neil, in the 2025 recruiting class. We'll close with this on the football side of things. A 4th wide receiver for Cincinnati in the class. I believe it's a 4th wide receiver. It might be a 5th, actually, with Isaiah Mitchell of Houston County committing to Cincinnati. Yes, their 4th wide receiver of the class. Had 16 offers before committing to Cincinnati. He's the 1,322nd ranked player nationally on 24/7 Sports, and their 114th ranked athletes. Cincinnati now up to 16 commits in the class, I believe. And he's a guy that's played both wide receiver and cornerback. Another one of those players, Neil, that I think could maybe blossom into something at UC. And more importantly, we'll see what happens with this recruitment, but they get him kind of brought in late enough in the cycle to where these other poachers don't see him get a UC offer from this UC talent evaluation staff and then go trying to poach away with that player after UC's done the hard groundwork on the tape watching and all that stuff.
Yeah, no, Russ, it's worth noting too that Isaiah Mitchell has had plenty of offers too. You mentioned the 16. You look down at some of those schools that were in the mix: Florida State, Georgia Tech, Mississippi State, Pittsburgh, South Florida was in the mix. So overall, I mean, he's had some quality offers, but overall, it's just another wide receiver / defensive back. Not too sure if he's going to be playing offense or defense. He can do both, but it's going to be interesting. But this is another guy who was on campus for a visit for the Houston game, where he picked up the Cincinnati offer as well. But it's a great sign for Cincinnati. Obviously, you knew the 2025 recruiting class is coming to an end with early signing day here within a month for the football program. So Cincinnati's still adding to that class, but 5'11", 170 pounds wide receiver DB out of Georgia. And Russ, it's worth noting that this is the 8th player in this class out of the state of Georgia as well to recruit to Cincinnati. So they're doing a great job recruiting the state of Georgia. But overall, it's another big-time addition for Cincinnati as they look to round out their 2025 class here in the final month or so of the season, the recruiting season. So it's going to be interesting, but another big-time commitment that could do both things. A big-time athlete for, if you watch him on film, he's got quick speed, can really get elusive off the breaks, out of his routes, off the line of scrimmage as well. So overall, I think this is a good addition for Cincinnati, but it's going to be interesting because you look at it, Russ, he took 2 officials to Florida State. So overall, you beat out another powerhouse school, even though Florida State is awful this year. But once you do that, it means you're doing something right. So overall, another addition to the 2025 class for Scott Satterfield and the Bearcats. It's 16 on the class, and it's actually the 4th wide receiver, Russ, in the class 2025.
That'll do it. On today's show for Neil Meyer, I'm Russ Heltman. We'll be back to preview the Iowa State matchup and get into the Nicholls State matchup on the hardwood, plus an update on Dan Skillings when we have our second show of the week right here on the Believe Network. Enjoy your Monday, everybody.
6, Ritter to the end zone, looking for Pierce. Did he hang on? Yes. Touchdown. Back as I've been around. Here he goes again. Busts free. Jerome Ford down the sideline. Foot race. House call. Touchdown. 79 yards. Big run in the Peach Bowl. This is a big one, too.